Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Naturalist Capitalist. I am your host, Reed Coverdale, and I've got Charles back on the show again. How's it going, Charles?
Oh, doing pretty good. I'm glad I'm off of third shift and can get back to a normal life.
Yeah. So is your 2021 more normal than your 2020 so far in your own personal life? Are things kind of reshaping for the good, or?
Well, my 2020 only got kind of crazy right there to the end when I took this new job and I got, switched up with my work schedule because, that good old COVID is still with us, and it took 3 people off of my job site. So I got moved over to third shift until they came back from their quarantine. So I'm off of it now, but you know, who knows what the rest of this year's got in store. It's not starting off very well.
No, and I was amazed around New Year's how many people were legitimately expecting something to change because we were headed into another calendar year. And I was like, you guys do know what's coming right up here, like on January 6th and then on January 20th. And, it's probably not going to go so smoothly. And they outdid my expectations with the turbulence, especially on January 6th. So I wanted to talk about that. When I first heard what was happening, I was, I didn't see any pictures. I just heard from somebody that they were storming the Capitol building. In my mind, that was, hundreds of men with guns and torches and, that were shooting people, storming into the building to go execute politicians and instate their leader. That was the image I was kind of given verbally. And then when I got done driving, I took another look and I saw that there were only some Capitol police there. There was no National Guard or anything. I saw pictures of everyone inside the Capitol building. There's this great picture where they're not even going outside of the velvet chains, like guarding the walkway. They're all standing in between them. And then the most vandalous pictures are where they're like stealing the podium and hanging from the doorway. And I mean, they're taking selfies in Nancy Pelosi's office. So regardless of how it happened, I think what happened was extremely misrepresented by the media. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely would. For example, and I'm all about people having the right to protest, but just like I said about the stuff over the summer, when we had the issue with whether it be Kenosha or what happened after George Floyd, I don't think this really helps anything. The only thing that I said back then was, if you're gonna do it and you're that pissed off, at least take it up with the source of the real problem, and that isn't the guy on Main Street. But the problem here is the defense we heard for each one of those protests was, well, they're mostly peaceful. They're mostly peaceful. I mean, we had video evidence of people burning down, Targets and O'Reilly's and whatever, but the media covered it as it's all mostly peaceful. Okay, there's thousands upon thousands of these people who showed up to DC, but it only probably looks like a few hundred of them are the ones who stormed the Capitol. You know what I mean? So going off that same logic, you should say that, well, it was all mostly peaceful. There's a few nuts who broke loose, wanted to storm the Capitol building, and so it still should be mostly peaceful. But no, they take an entire different movement. Now, all of a sudden, the whole movement should be condemned because of the actions of the few, whereas it was the entire different, way of looking at things over the summer when it wasn't the government. And to me, that just shows the elitist attitude. I'm not necessarily saying it's a Black Lives Matter versus MAGA thing where they're going to defend one and accuse the other. Some may look at it that way, but to me, I look at it as this. To me, it shows that, number one, they are fine with your property being destroyed. They are fine with your life being put in danger. But the minute you bring the problem to them, they're clutching their pearls, and hell has to be paid all of a sudden. It's an entirely different set of circumstances when they get a little taste of the medicine that they're perfectly fine with allowing people in a town to experience. Just like when Chop and Chaz was set up over the summer, you've got that mayor or the governor or whatever she was saying we could have the summer of love until they showed up outside of her house, and now it was time for everyone to go home.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I said several times, hey, at least these guys are going after the right building for their anger. Like they're angry at the government for confirming Joe Biden in what they believe to be a fraudulent election. So if what they thought were true, then they would be attacking the right cause, so at least their aim is correct. Kind of like you said, they're not burning businesses. I mean, there weren't thousands of MAGA protesters going to restaurants and screaming in people's faces, like, say Donald Trump is your president, say Donald Trump is your president. And they weren't ransacking homes. So, yeah, I mean, I think comparing this, and especially making this out to be worse than what happened over the summer, is just ridiculous. And then also, I went to a protest in Denver over the summer, and because I care about criminal justice reform, I care about I think the police have too much power and they have too little accountability. So I went mostly to try to talk with a bunch of people who were there about what the actual problems were. And while I was there, I didn't see any foul play from the cops or the protesters. It was completely peaceful. The cops were blocking the traffic for us while we walked across the road. It was a 95-degree day, and these guys were giving water out. They gave them to the protesters. They gave them to the cops. It was all exactly what it was supposed to be. But if you watch the news, they would frame it as though, it was a violent fight every night. I didn't think it was accurate. So with I also got to say that I had mixed feelings about this because in one way it felt great seeing people run into the Capitol building and seeing the pictures of the terrified legislators. Some of that felt kind of good. I was like, yeah, show them. But at the same time, this was a cause that I did not sympathize with. In general, the aggravation toward government and the feeling of being misrepresented, yes, but the specific cause that was behind actually storming the Capitol and, trying to keep Trump as president, that is something I did not resonate with. And I just realized that there's this split that shouldn't be there, because the protesters over the summer and the protesters at the Capitol, in the grand scheme of things, they have a lot of the same aggravations, but they narrow them down to these tiny little channels, and they look at each other as enemies, while the state can just pass more legislation, take more money, do whatever it wants. So the state wins, the protesters lose, and the state continues to keep the protesters thinking that the opposing side is their enemy, and that they're not in the same fight against the state.
Yeah. I've noticed that a lot myself. To me, and that was one of my big criticisms about what took place here. I mean, I've given my stance on if there was some sort of a shenanigan with the election, and personally, I think if there were, I think Republicans had to be in on it. We know Democrats have tried to rig the primaries, but at the same time, we know Republicans gerrymander districts very heavily too. I consider that to be a type of trying to rig an election, when you try to draw weird lines around districts to make sure you win. So to me, I think both sides are dirty of playing games with elections. That being said, I don't know that one side could pull off a national scheme to rig it against one candidate. I know there's going to be the examples people could point at to us. They might say, well, it happened in Democrat districts or whatever, but it's still a Republican state like Georgia. If there was really something going on, why did they not fight it? Why did they allow it to go through? I'm just convinced, and I think we're seeing the more evidence of it now. If something took place, Republicans, number one, allowed it to happen. They don't like Donald Trump. The base likes Donald Trump. The Republican politicians don't. His mouth has been far too dangerous to their strategy they've used for years and years. They much rather be the party of Dick Cheney, Mitt Romney, John McCain, the Bushes. That's the party they want to be. And Trump took them away from that and stole their audience. That being said, when you bring a protest to D.C. for that reason, at best, you might have 50% of the country who agree it was stolen, but it's really not 50%. A lot of people who voted for Trump have said, yeah, it's over, let it go. Even some of them don't buy there was election fraud. So really, to me, I kind of see this as about maybe 25 to 30% of the country, really, to me at best. That's my personal view, that are sympathetic with this. That means you're still roughly about 75 to 70% of the country that's not on board with you. And that means when you start this, they're not going to support your cause. They're not going to back your movement. And you're going to have no real backbone to make that stand to the government. There's not going to be a continued pressure campaign. There's not going to be more and more people taking to the streets every day to try to make the people in D.C. scared. It's a flash in the pan. It's going to fizzle out quickly, and it's going to give the government exactly what they need to start passing more legislation, restricting civil liberties, restricting freedom, restricting freedom of speech. They've used this tactic for years, and to me, that's why I'm kind of convinced it's either number one, this thing was staged, or number one, they deliberately allowed it to happen, even if these weren't actors who were sent there to kind of instigate. Even if that's not the case, I think that they allowed this deliberately to happen so that either way, the excuse could be used to do these things, because they've made a history of doing that.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. That's what I wanted to get into next. So there was no National Guard positioned there ready to go, even though they knew there were going to be at least thousands of people. There's a discrepancy in the reports of how many people were there. It seems like tens of thousands of people were there. So they knew that tens of thousands of angry Trump supporters were going to be there. They knew that a controversial vote was going to take place, and they knew that they had the votes to confirm Biden. So they knew that all these angry protesters would have something to get very upset about. If you look at Washington, D.C. right now, they've got 20,000 National Guard troops there. They've got checkpoints. They've got military vehicles. They've got armed personnel everywhere. On January 6th, they had a very weak Capitol Police showing. And there are a couple videos of the police letting people through the barriers. And, like I said, this wasn't a violent uprising. I know a few people died, but you're talking about hundreds of people storming a building. If this had been intentionally a violent protest to kill people and to behead politicians, people would have died. The cops would have had to shoot protesters. The protesters would have guns themselves. This just really, to me, looks like a false flag. And like you said, I shouldn't make assertions about, whether it was planned or whether it was just allowed to happen. But it does seem that it was at least enabled. It does seem that they wanted some sort of scene to be able to justify, what they have in Washington, D.C. right now, and legislation that they're talking about bringing down the pipe that's going to monitor social media more closely, that's going to be more invasive into our civil liberties and privacy in general, phone calls, whatever, because we need to know when the next domestic terror attack is coming. And it's completely validated any censorship that the media has used against conservative voices. So, you had a couple hundred idiots that stormed into a building with no weapons, And now you have all this backlash, and people are paying more attention to the couple hundred idiots than the backlash. And this really reminds me of 9/11 with the Patriot Act and the Iraq War. People were way more scared of terrorist attacks than the backlash against terror attacks. Kind of like with coronavirus. Like, people have been more worried about coronavirus than everything that has been going on as retaliation against coronavirus. So do you think it was? You said, I think it was before we started recording, you were talking about the Patriot Act and how it was sitting in reserves until they had an excuse to let it go. There's a bill, I forget the exact name of it, but it's about expanding surveillance for domestic terrorism, written by Adam Schiff, and it was introduced about 2 years ago. Now they're talking about trying to get that passed because they have a perfect excuse. So is this just all a scheme to get more authoritarian legislation and have the people behind it?
Well, with especially what's been going on lately, I want to start by saying this just for, because we are on the YouTube platform here. And so for all the fact checkers, I'm going to be clear. This is speculation on my part.
Yep.
I'm not saying this happened. To me, I'm just putting two and two together. Now, if this isn't the case, then I would welcome the people in charge. I'd welcome the Capitol Police. I'd welcome, those in charge of protecting the D.C. area to better inform us on why there was such a failure here. But the one thing that stands out to me is there's always, whenever these things are allowed to happen, this failure of intelligence is what they blame it on, right? It's a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of communication. Well, we mentioned 9/11, and we were told that with everything that was put in place after 9/11, that was to prevent these failure of intelligences. Why? Because, well, when 9/11 happened, Condoleezza Rice got a memo a few months previous saying there's a plan to do this. No one acted on it. No one seemed to try to stop it. They just let it sit there. Okay. Then 9/11 happened. Furthermore than that, Dick Cheney was in command when we supposedly had planes heading toward the Pentagon. They asked, should we fire upon it, take it down before it hits the Pentagon? He says, no, I haven't told you anything any different. Stand down. So now people give their defense. They give their explanation that he was hoping maybe it wouldn't hit. I mean, believe what you want to. But to me, this failure of intelligence excuse, I deem to be just a little too convenient. That these things just continue to happen over a period of time, even after they've already violated our civil liberties with the Patriot Act to spy on us, to prevent these things, and yet nothing can be done. Okay, nothing can be done to stop them from happening. Okay. Furthermore than that, one thing we've been hearing about why Parler was deplatformed, why Trump was banned on Twitter, why other people are banned on Twitter, is that they're looking at the things they were saying and they figured out that this is violent rhetoric. It's inciting violence. So let me get this straight. None of these people were tweeting any of this stuff before January 6th. And you already know they're spying on us. We've already been shown that the NSA spies on things. Twitter's obviously keeping tabs on what we're tweeting out. So why was there that failure of intelligence? Why did no one look at these same tweets that are being deemed as incite to violence now and say that was incite to violence then? Nothing happened. And so to me, that just furthers what you brought up and what I mentioned to you before we started the video here. They couldn't pass the Patriot Act until after 9/11. Edward Snowden revealed that. He said that it had been sitting on a shelf for a few years, and they knew they couldn't get it passed because the people are not going to go along with it because they had nothing to fear. The minute that they had a boogeyman and they were scared and they were willing to put their safety in the hands of the government to sacrifice some freedom, they weighed the difference and they determined, most of the people anyway, that we would rather be safe, which Ben Franklin warned us about. That being said, look at everything that's happened since the Patriot Act. Every time they want more gun reform, every time they want more gun control, come after your Second Amendment, it's because there was some mass shooting, which our mass surveillance state didn't prevent then. Even when we find out the FBI in some cases were looking into these people, such as the Orlando nightclub shooter.
Right.
He was being investigated, but he wasn't stopped. It still happened. And now we should all have our gun rights restricted because these people who already took our freedoms to protect us failed to do their jobs. Every time there's a big a disaster, a crisis, so something really bad happens, instead of them saying, well, we failed to do our job we told you we would do, they say, no, we need to take away more freedoms so that we can protect you even better. And somehow people keep falling for it, hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. And another thing I'll add is, there are some ridiculous claims from the Trump supporters that this was Antifa who planned this thing to demonize Republicans. And that's kind of like with 9/11 when you start talking about fake planes and explosives planted in the buildings. What it does is it delegitimizes any real criticism you have of the official narrative. And I think that the people that might be hiding some things, they love it when these ridiculous, kooky conspiracy theories come out, because then it makes anyone who has any questions look like an idiot because they lump you right in with those same people.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think this was very similar to 9/11. I believe that Al Qaeda flew planes into the World Trade Center, but I also think that the government had foreknowledge that something was going to happen, and they kind of let it happen so that they would have an excuse. I also feel kind of similar about Pearl Harbor. If you look at Pearl Harbor, they had a lot of knowledge that something was going to happen, and they positioned all of our planes in the center of the airstrips in circles. And the day the attack happened, all the aircraft carriers, which were the actual important ships, were out at sea. All the battleships got toasted, which were pretty much outdated by World War II anyway. So there's a lot of stuff like this where you wonder how much they knew and how much they wanted to let happen so that they would have an excuse for a retaliation. That's kind of what I think was happening here. But I wanted to go into censorship. So before we get into any legal ramifications or what the government should control versus private business or whatever, I just want to talk about the actual morality of censorship, like whether it's something that should exist or not. Something I hear people say a lot is, there is a restriction on the First Amendment. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater or bomb in an airport. And I agree, but they use that as a metaphor for instances where that's not what's happening. I do agree that if you literally yell bomb in an airport, that you should not be under protection for saying that. You are inciting immediate fear and immediate danger to everybody in that situation. Same as if you yell fire in a crowded theater. That's not the same as making generalities about something. If you're posing a direct threat to somebody by threatening them with violence, saying you're going to kill them or something, then yeah, that's a situation where you are forfeiting your First Amendment right, I would say. But if you are saying things that are hateful or things that are conspiratorial or things that are unpopular, that's not in the same boat. And that's the literal reason the First Amendment exists, so you can say those things. We don't have the First Amendment to talk about the weather. We have it to talk about really controversial ideas. So I am 100% anti-censorship. And I think that ridiculous ideas should be combated with logic and fact, not censorship. I think censorship turns idiots and turns dangerous theories into martyrs and conceivable realities. If people see you shutting something down, even if it's completely stupid, they think that you're afraid that they're saying something true, and they'll look into it and give it more validity than it deserves. So I'm 100% anti-censorship. I just want to get your thoughts on whether, aside from legal ramifications, just the concept of censorship, what do you think about it?
Oh, I'm 100% with you. I'm not for censorship. To me, obviously, I think if someone is outright calling for violence, like you said, yelling fire in a crowded theater or whatever, I don't see the harm there. But the problem that I'm going to say, because that's the big defense here, is they're saying that Trump, with what happened with Trump and other people, that he was calling for violence or inciting violence. First of all, I never saw him call for violence. A lot of them want to reference where he was speaking right before the protest and said they respect strength. Well, they always, this is the one thing that Trump has been right about when he calls out the mainstream media. They soundbite what he says. He followed that right up by saying peaceful. Okay,
Right.
he never called for violence. But that being said, this is the argument for why they're defending why he was banned. Okay. The problem with that is, what about the people who aren't even U.S. citizens, who are not protected by our First Amendment, but are literally on the record for saying that they want to genocide people? Like these leaders of other countries. I mean, the Ayatollah of Iran can have a Twitter account, but the sitting U.S. president cannot. You see what I mean? So that those things, and there's a lot more names. I've heard people give all these different names from other countries who have said far worse things. I'm not familiar with every one of them and don't remember their names. But the one example that I'm going to point to right here at home that sticks out the most to me is Mad Max, Maxine Waters. Okay, she has literally. She didn't say it on Twitter, but guess what? That video of Trump, I don't think was necessarily. He might have posted it to Twitter, but they really came after Trump for things he said necessarily that weren't on Twitter either. And all these other platforms that banned him, he didn't say it on their platform, but they still banned him. So Maxine Waters is just one of a lot of people who should absolutely be facing the same consequences. The reason I mention her is because she is on the record when she was doing her whole impeach 45 speeches for 2+ years. And she literally said, if you find Republicans out in public, if you find people from Trump's cabinet out in public, corner them off and harass them. Some could interpret that as form a mob. Okay, well, let's look at what's happened since then. Rand Paul was attacked by his neighbor. Rand Paul was nearly attacked after the Republican convention. Okay. You look at the things that have been taking place from people on the left, one could easily make the same case they're making for Donald Trump, that her language has called for an incite to violence on Republicans or Republican voters. Furthermore, let's take it a step farther. If you can be deplatformed for supporting what took place on the 6th, why can you not be deplatformed for supporting this stuff from over the summer, where innocent bystanders who are not responsible for George Floyd had their businesses burned down and their livelihoods ruined, and you're calling and making excuses for that angry mob? One could give that as you're making an excuse and at least contributing to the incite of violence by not calling it out for what it is. Yeah. So if we're going to be intellectually honest about who should be facing these consequences, if it's simply an enforcement of policy, there should be an awful lot of politicians on the Democrat side of the aisle who should be facing that same consequence, but they're not. And since they're not, that rules immediately out that this was just enforcement of policy. This is a clear bias. This is censorship. And those who deny that are simply they're just happy that Trump got his tweeting privileges taken away. They like the fact his phone became a quote unquote brick. But they in other words, they can't see the forest for the trees. They're blinded by a Trump derangement syndrome and don't understand this is going to bite you in the ass sooner or later.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, why would social media companies do this? Because it doesn't seem like it's popular with most of their users. I mean, with some of them it is, but it seems like a lot of them are really upset about this type of thing. And not just this most recent move, but moves in the past, removing videos, removing posts. I remember when you could sell guns on Facebook. I mean, can you imagine nowadays? Like that's gone. So why all these reforms? And I think this is really important because it shows that these companies are not acting just in their own private interests. When you alluded earlier to, whenever a crisis happens, it's an excuse to unleash more authoritarian legislation. Similarly, the heads of big tech have been brought before Congress at least one time. I remember when it happened about a year and a half ago, and they were grilled by dozens of congressional members about how, allowing false news, allowing false advertisements on their platforms was wrong. Um, and a lot of the guys, like Mark Zuckerberg, everyone was there, and they're like, look, we don't monitor every single post. We don't have the ability to. And they were getting grilled by all these politicians. And it was really after that you started to see drastic changes in policy, where you started to see massive takedowns of media personalities that we didn't see before. Because before that, it had been people like Milo Yiannopoulos, maybe Alex Jones. But then they really started going after like mainstream conservative networks and personalities. So the argument that this is just a private business conducting business in its own personal interest, I don't buy that. I think that one of the reasons they shut Trump down is because they were afraid that if they didn't, they would get hauled before Congress again, and they would be held accountable for what happened at the Capitol. And, all these members of Congress would be screaming at them again about how irresponsible they were by letting Trump's message end up on their platform. So this, to me, is a corporate mess where you have the government forcing a giant corporation into doing its bidding. It's sort of like Raytheon, fueling the military-industrial complex. Is Raytheon really just a private business doing well in the marketplace, or is it really an extra arm of the government that is thriving off of fascism? And fascism is when the government taxes us and gives our money to private corporations like Raytheon, like Halliburton. I don't think this is much different. So I don't buy the cut and dry narrative that this is just a private business and it can do whatever it wants. I think this goes deeper than that, and it's really concerning. What do you think?
Absolutely. First of all, like you brought up with what Raytheon does, the big tech companies have been contributing to the political campaign, so obviously the politicians are going to be in their pocket. The biggest thing, though, is, and this is something that I brought up, I did kind of 2 videos about censorship. And the first one was just kind of explaining what we've already explained. You need to understand this is going to bite you in the butt. They're going to come after your civil liberties. Well, surprisingly, it's not like I got ratioed. I still had more likes than dislikes. But there were more than the dislikes. There were people in my comments section who were accusing me of being a Trumper. And I'm just upset that my orange man got banned from Twitter. And this, I'm like, do you even watch my stuff? I didn't vote for Trump. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm looking at the bigger picture here. So I heard someone say this over this past week when I was working my third shift. This never occurred to me, and I wish it had. I wish it was my own idea, but I can't take credit for it. A guy that I work with actually mentioned this, and he said, these people are quick to defend the private corporation doing this now, but they didn't think that a private corporation had the right to refuse to bake a cake. And I was like, wow, I have not even thought of that yet. And then immediately I made a video, and there were no people coming in the comment section of that video arguing with that take. And that take is just simply this: how many people from coast to coast in this country bake cakes? There's got to be millions of them, right? The amount of places that you can go to get a cake baked, I don't even want to try to count numbers that high. Okay. That being said, how many social media platforms can you go and express your viewpoint and have civil discourse or whatever, which is what they're supposed to be there for, right? There's not that many. Now we got Parler, and Parler became the Twitter alternative because Twitter was starting to really do a lot of censorship. It actually stole some business from Facebook as well. So because you could put, I believe, a whole lot more characters on Parler than you could in a tweet. So it's kind of like a combination of Facebook and Twitter in a lot of ways. That being said, they were doing pretty good. And then when it was announced that they were going to be removed from the Android Google Play and Apple would ban them if they didn't make changes that Apple demanded, they became like the most downloaded app. They were number one in downloads. People were scrambling to download this app so that they had the alternative before they tried to take it away. The minute that happened, Amazon comes out and they were in control of the servers. And they said, okay, well, we're going to shut your servers off so that you can't continue. And now no one else wants to do business with them and give them servers to continue to have their platform out there. So even another platform was completely shut down. So to me, this says one thing. These big tech companies, Google, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all these places, they're so big at this point that they are to the point that they're not even going to allow fair competition in the marketplace. So the whole philosophy about the free market and free market being able to make a decision to not do something is because there's supposed to be competition out there. And if this business doesn't want to do it for you, there's probably someone else who will. For example, there were thousands to millions of other people who would have baked that wedding cake for that couple, but that one would not. And that went as far as to the Supreme Court, for God's sakes. I mean, we're talking about a wedding cake, okay? And you're that outraged that someone, because of a religious reason, doesn't want to bake a wedding cake, and there's plenty of other people who will, but you're going to defend these large monopolistic corporations who are not allowing a competition to provide a service that they won't provide for someone else. They run them out of business in a collaborated effort, and they basically are censoring what people can say. It's not an enforcement of policy. It's simply these people can say things we deem incitement to violence, I guess, and get away with it, whereas this side cannot, and we're going to be the ones in charge to pick and choose who can and who can't. That's not policy enforcement. That's simply censorship. And if you're going to defend that when there's no competition, and it's clearly a massive group trying to control the market, but you're going to be pissed about a goldfish in an ocean, basically. Yeah. This small little business who doesn't want to do something, and that pisses you off. You've got a clear problem in your logic here.
Yeah, there are some libertarians who disagree with me here, and I at least respect their position because it is ideologically consistent, because they do defend the cake baker and they would also defend Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So it's at least consistent, even though I disagree. But when a liberal who was angry about the guy not baking the cake, and they also think the government has complete authority to lock everyone down and shut down their businesses, and now they're all about, oh, hey, the private enterprise can do whatever it wants. Like, fuck you. I mean, that is so inconsistent and so dishonest. And like I said, I mean, I really am looking at this as it's not a government-free issue. I think you could make a more solid claim if the government had not been pressuring all these changes, if the government didn't already give funding to some of these entities, if they didn't demand backdoor access to all of our search history, if there wasn't already this intense marriage and it was clearly defined that this was private versus state, then we would have a conversation about, well, is this an antitrust situation that we're coming up on? But I don't think it's even that. Like, we are, I look at this still as like a government created issue. I think the government wants this censorship. They want this control over mass thought. They want control over the media, and people who are, screaming to defend the corporations here when the corporations are doing exactly what the government wants them to do. Like you said, they're missing the forest for the trees. And I think people are starting to wake up to it. Like, a lot of people who weren't on board with it, a lot of people who weren't aware of how bad it was, they're starting to see it. With me, it was really like a year and a half ago that I first realized how bad it was, because you'd always hear like Ben Shapiro and, you know, Tucker Carlson and people talking about censorship. I didn't really take it that seriously. And then I worked on Tulsi Gabbard's campaign. And man, if you wanted a, a heavy introduction to censorship, that was a great place. So I'm skeptical about the solutions I'm hearing presented. A lot of people are talking about repealing Section 230 or breaking up big tech companies. Austin Peterson actually had a good take, which is rare for him. He thinks that we need to build a private internet service provider that's independent of these big tech companies. And you're seeing people kind of branch out in those fields. Like Dave Rubin has made this locals thing that Tulsi Gabbard joined him with. For now, that's the route I'm going in. I am staying on Twitter and YouTube because that's where my following is, but I have joined locals. If other independent media outlets like this arise, I am going to go there and hopefully eventually transition off of Twitter and Facebook as a protest vote, because I don't approve of what they're doing. I'm not a lawyer. I've looked into Section 230 a bit. I've read through it and I've listened to different people talk about it. It seems like rewriting it might be a good idea. Like, it seems like it's not very well written, but completely repealing it would actually worsen the problem we already have, because then big tech companies become liable for everything that is posted on their platform. So they would either have to pre-approve every single post, or they would have to just ban the crap out of a ton of people that they don't trust at all. So all the things we don't like would just have to become 10 times worse. And it would either be that or they would shut down. So I think a lot of people advocating repealing Section 230, they haven't really thought through what that actually looks like. They think if we repeal it, we just go back to 2005 when we all could post on Facebook and everything was happy and, we all got along or whatever. I don't think that's really the case. So what do you think? Like, what is the best solution going forward?
Well, to me, I'm completely with you. A complete repeal of Section 230 is only going to make their censorship worse, because now they got to cover their butt for their own protection against lawsuits. That being said, to me, I think the news organizations fall under that protection for Section 230 as well, right? So to me, I think that
I think they don't. I think they are liable for whatever they post because they're publishers.
I thought with it, the communications. Again, I haven't read a ton into the Section 230, but to me, the news organizations should be liable for spreading false information like that, because they're literally a news organization. It is incumbent upon them, especially with all their wealth and the money that they have, to at least give people honest reporting. And if they want to push propaganda, I think they should be held liable for that. The thing with the social media problem is, though, you're going to give them reason to say, okay, we have to do more of this if you remove that protection from them, because realistically, they are not in. They're not the publisher. You're the publisher. It's just their platform, really. You see what I mean?
Right.
The problem, and I'm on locals as well. I joined when I saw what Tulsi did there, so I'm on the locals platform. The big thing, what you brought up with like Austin Peterson's idea, which is build a private internet, basically. Are they going to allow it to happen? Because somebody's going to have to come forward with money. Someone's going to have to come forward and fund this thing, kind of like they did with Parler, right? And so when they start trying to build this, I don't know that you're going to, I feel like if something like that were to happen, it's going to be a grassroots effort. Okay, grassroots, pretty much you can interpret to mean one thing. It's not going to have as much financial backing as the other side. When they don't have as much money to throw around the room to get their way, the big tech companies who have buku amounts of money are going to come in and throw their weight around again, just like they've already done with Parler. And they could very easily say, okay, this private stuff over here, this is dangerous. They're allowing people to say all these things. It's calling for an incitement to violence. And at that point, it wouldn't surprise me if the government, because I don't know that they could just deplatform if it's all private stuff. At that point, I would expect probably these government entities who are taking money from those corporations, that is when they step in and say, no, you can't do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I mean, that's what they do all the time. The cronyism, step in and stifle competition that's coming up from underneath.
Right.
That's actually why I've been skeptical of antitrust laws when I first started researching them way back when. Made perfect sense. It's like, yeah, something like the situation we're in right now with big tech is probably the most realistic situation where antitrust laws would make sense, because information is a commodity that it's very easy to have a monopoly on. It's not like copper or corn or land or whatever. Like this is the most sensible place for antitrust laws in U.S. history, I would say. The problem is antitrust laws have been used for the opposite reason for which they were intended. Big surprise, right? The government's abusing its power. And it's actually, they've used antitrust laws to stifle competition that was going to threaten something that was even bigger. And so antitrust laws throughout history have actually enabled corporations more than they've disabled them. So I'm really skeptical about antitrust action ever being used. But that being said, if it were to ever be used right now, makes the most sense. And I'll attribute that thought to Dave Smith. I watched his episode that came out recently about the marriage of government and big tech, and I shouldn't take credit for that thought process because that's also what he said. So just pointing that out there for anyone who's watching. I'll put a link in the description to that video. But this is just how I feel about everything that's gone on with the coronavirus, with the consolidation of corporate power and government power. You've got I don't trust the corporations to fix this problem, and I don't trust the government to fix this problem. We've gotten to a place in this country where there's almost no difference. We have a fascist state in an economic sense. Government and corporation work hand in hand. So the only way forward I see is complete decentralization and severing of corporation and state. There should be absolutely no connection between the two, because the connection is what has led to all these problems. There's a reason that Walmart didn't have to shut down because,
absolutely, in
the pockets of politicians. So,
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. And I know, obviously, like me and you voted Libertarian, and I know a lot of the people who watch your channel and your viewers are a lot more Libertarian leaning in the free market, and I'm for that in a lot of ways. But the one thing, at least to me, maybe I'm wrong. This is just my take on it. I think that the free market principle works great when you're talking about the average business in America. You know what I mean? When we're talking about what we saw on Main Street or still see in downtown. We're talking about, retail stores and grocery stores, auto parts stores. I think the free market definitely does still today what it was intended to do. There's a competition there. The problem is when something gets so big, and I guess Walmart could be, for example, the biggest precursor to a lot of what we're seeing right now is when our government let Walmart do so much for so long. The problem is if they get to be too big, if they start to incorporate too many elements, the people of this country might not like what I'm about to say, but in all honesty, we're a lazy society in a lot of ways. Years ago, there wasn't this one-stop shop. There were places where you went and got different things, okay? And then these bigger stores came along to incorporate more and more elements. Now, when you go to Walmart, you can buy groceries, you can buy clothes, you can buy medicine, you can buy lawn and garden, you can buy toys, you can buy electronics, you can get gas when you leave, and you can stop at McDonald's and grab a cheeseburger on the way out the door. Okay, there's so much stuff in one simple place that it's hard for any other store to really compete because people love the one-stop shop concept. It's why Best Buy put Radio Shack out of business, okay? And so I know the philosophy here is, well, let the free market do its thing. There's going to be change, and that's true. But the problem is once a company gets so big that they then start constantly using their weight to stop any competition, now the free market thing becomes counterproductive because there is no competition to get the best price for the consumer. One person has so much control on the market that they're literally dictating this is the way we're going to do things. If a competition comes along, I'm going to sling some money to get them put out of business. I'll use whatever is at my disposal, crooked or not. And to me, when you start doing crooked tactics, that's not competition anymore. That's like cheating at the board game here. Okay, you're not playing by the rules to get business from the consumer. You're simply cheating at this point. Okay, you're not doing things for that customer to make them want to come to your store. You're simply using your power and influence so that they can't shop at someone else, for example, or they're less likely to. And then they sling some money at the government so they can incorporate gas stations even into their own chain, and the government doesn't break out the antitrust law on them. I think people should have looked at that as an example of, okay, where could this stop? Now we've got what's happening with these big tech companies. They started out just like Walmart did. Now they've grown. They're making money hand over fist. They've got a ton of power, a ton of influence, and they're buying off the politicians. And they're doing the exact same thing. They're telling you, no, if you want business, you come to our platform. Anyone else comes along, we're going to run you out of business. Yeah. So to me, those things, at least to me, are counterproductive to the ideology of the free market. The free market and the entire principle is based on competition. That's why I mentioned with that cake baker earlier. He has no corner on the cake baking market. There's plenty of competition for him. But these people have cornered the market. We need competition there. And so you've got to break them out from the government, and we need to get people in the government who are going to start reining some of these people in and allowing that competition. Because if they actually do get real competition and then people leave their platform because of it, that could then affect their actions, because if they don't adjust their attitude, they're going out of business.
Yeah. Once you have the government backing a certain player, it is not a free market anymore. And that's exactly what we've had forever. The war on drugs is a great example of that, because there was a valid competitor rising. And so the paper industry had to snuff it out so that it wouldn't have to keep up its game, and that type of stuff is so pervasive throughout our economy, throughout our history. But we'll wrap up here, and we'll see how much longer your YouTube channel and my YouTube channel are still up. I haven't been kicked off of Twitter, even though I've said some pretty, some pretty radical things. I'm going to keep doing that. If they remove me, so be it. I think the takeaway from this, at least the censorship part, is people should be equally as skeptical of corporate power as they are of government power, and realize that the two build off of each other. So if you're a free market person who is defending corporations with all your might, realize that you're actually not really defending a free market. You've been defending government subsidization of a business to get it to the size that it is. I'll just give you the last word, Charles, and we'll close out.
I mean, yeah, you're dead on point. I mean, I was trying to encompass a little bit of that in what I said. This is not a representation, and to me, of what a free market should really be looking like here. But that being said, maybe we'll get some changes. 2021, and I don't think is off to the best of starts. And I'll wrap it up with this, as you pointed out. I get into just calling it like I see it on YouTube. I say what I think on Twitter. So how long I have a Twitter account and how long I have a YouTube channel remains to be seen. At this rate, I may not even make it to 1,000 subscribers before they wind up shutting me down. But I mean, we'll just have to see what happens. I mean, at least at this point, there's still a few alternatives for YouTube with I know you've got BitChute, you've got I've heard of Rumble, and then there's the Odyssey, for example. Yeah, well, Rockfin, you got to get approved, and they won't approve me. So,
Oh, okay.
so but that being said, we'll just have to see what happens. And the big takeaway is, for the love of God, Libertarian Party, you got to start running more congressional and Senate candidates. Next time I have an election, I want to see someone on the ballot for a House seat for my district in South Carolina. The next time the Senate comes up, I want to see a Libertarian candidate down for a Senate seat in South Carolina. And then my message for the people is, if you're getting tired of this stuff, for the love of God, please stop voting for Democrats and Republicans.
Yeah, well, I fully endorse that message, and we're going to get you to 1,000 before they zuck your account. So everybody go follow Charles on the Lone Wolf. Is it the Lone Wolf podcast or report? I keep forgetting.
Lone Wolf podcast.
All right, go check him out there. Give him a subscription. Give him some likes. He's got good content. Charles, we'll have you back on soon.
Thank you, Reed.